The frigid Montana winter of 1878 showed no mercy, as Hannah Summers clutched her feverish son against her chest, her own strength fading with each labored breath. Death had already claimed her husband to consumption 2 months prior, and now, as she lay shivering in their isolated cabin, 5-year-old Thomas's terrified eyes reflected the grim reality they faced. Outside, the howling blizzard matched the desperation in her heart as she pressed her cracked lips to her son's forehead, knowing that without help, neither would survive the night. "Just hold on, Tommy," Hannah whispered, wrapping the threadbare blanket tighter around them both. The fire had died hours ago, and she lacked the strength to drag herself across the room for more wood. Her body burned with fever even as her limbs felt like ice. The irony wasn't lost on her. To burn and freeze simultaneously seemed a cruelly poetic way to die. Thomas stirred against her chest, his small fingers clutching weakly at her nightgown. "Mama's cold," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the wind's mournful wail. "I know, darling," she replied, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "Just sleep now." Hannah closed her eyes, memories of brighter days flooding her mind. Just 3 years ago, she and William had left Philadelphia with dreams of building a life in the West. They'd been so full of hope, so certain that hard work and love would conquer all obstacles. Now she lay dying, leaving their son orphaned in this merciless wilderness. A sudden pounding at the door jolted her from her thoughts. At first, she believed it to be the wind, but the sound came again, deliberate, human. "Hello?" A deep voice called from outside. "Anybody in there?" Hannah tried to call out, but her voice emerged as little more than a rasp. The door creaked open anyway, sending a blast of snow and frigid air swirling into the cabin. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, shoulders broad beneath a snow-dusted coat. He stepped inside, quickly shutting the door behind him. "Good Lord," the man muttered, taking in the scene before him. In 3 long strides he crossed to where Hannah and Thomas lay. "Madam?" His voice was gentle as he knelt beside them. "Madam, can you hear me?" Hannah forced her eyes open, trying to focus on the face before her. A stranger, bearded, weather-beaten, but with kind eyes that reminded her oddly of the summer sky. "My boy," she managed to whisper. "Please, help my boy." The man's gaze shifted to Thomas, who stared up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Mama's cold," Thomas repeated, his small voice trembling. The stranger's expression softened. He reached out and pressed a gloved hand to Hannah's forehead, then to Thomas's. His frown deepened. "Not anymore, son," he said, his voice low and determined as he quickly shed his coat and wrapped it around them both. "Not anymore." With surprising gentleness, the man lifted both Hannah and Thomas as if they weighed nothing. "I'm Kieran Vance," he said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "And I'm getting you both somewhere warm." Hannah tried to protest they were strangers. After all, but consciousness was slipping away, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was the steady beat of Kieran's heart against her ear as he carried them out into the storm. When Hannah next opened her eyes, she was surrounded by warmth. For a disorienting moment, she wondered if this was death, if the cold had finally claimed her. But the crackling of a fire and the smell of something savory cooking told her otherwise. She lay in an unfamiliar bed, beneath layers of thick blankets. Turning her head required monumental effort, but she managed, desperate to locate Thomas. Relief flooded through her when she saw her son sleeping peacefully in a small trundle bed beside her. His cheeks, which had been so pale, now showed a healthy flush. "He's doing better." The deep voice startled her. The man from before Kieran sat in a chair by the fire, watching her. "The fever's broken. Yours too, I reckon." Hannah tried to speak, but her throat felt like sandpaper. Kieran seemed to understand. He moved to her side, helping her to sit up before offering a cup of water. "Slowly now," he cautioned as she drank. After a few sips, Hannah found her voice. "How long have we been here?" "3 days," Kieran replied, taking the cup when she finished. "Worst of the storms past now." Hannah studied him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair streaked prematurely with silver at the temples. His face was tanned from long days outdoors, but his blue eyes held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "You saved our lives," she said simply. "Thank you seems inadequate." Kieran shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Hannah replied. "They wouldn't have." She'd learned that hard lesson over the past year, as neighbors had gradually stopped visiting after William fell ill. Fear of consumption had turned former friends into strangers. Kieran seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude. He stood, moving back toward the fire. "You should rest more. I've sent word to the doctor in town. He'll come when the road's clear." "Where exactly are we?" Hannah asked, realizing she had no idea where this man had brought them. "My ranch," Kieran replied. "About 5 miles from your cabin." Hannah frowned. "I didn't know anyone lived that close." "I keep to myself mostly," he said, stoking the fire. "Moved here about 8 months ago." A silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling flames and Thomas's soft breathing. "You have a name, madam?" Kieran finally asked. "Hannah," she replied. "Hannah Summers, and that's Thomas." Kieran nodded. "Well, Mrs. Summers, you and your boy are welcome here until you're well enough to return home." The mention of home sent a wave of anxiety through Hannah. Even before falling ill, she'd been struggling to maintain the cabin. Without William's strength and knowledge, simple tasks had become nearly impossible. The roof leaked, the garden had failed, and their meager savings were dwindling rapidly. "My husband died," she said abruptly, needing him to understand. 2 months ago. Consumption." Kieran's expression remained unchanged, though something flickered in his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss." Hannah expected to see fear cross his face, the same fear she'd seen in others when they learned of William's illness. Instead, Kieran merely nodded, accepting the information without retreating. "The doctor will want to check you both," he said. "Make sure you're not contagious." But tuberculosis usually takes longer to develop. Hannah was surprised by his knowledge. "You sound like you know something about medicine." A shadow passed over Kieran's face. "War teaches a man things he'd rather not know," he said quietly. Before Hannah could respond, Thomas stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Mama," he called, his voice small but stronger than it had been in days. Hannah tried to rise, but Kieran moved first, helping Thomas from his bed and bringing him to his mother. The boy curled against her side, his small hand finding hers. "The nice man helped us," Hannah explained, smoothing Thomas's unruly brown hair. Thomas looked up at Kieran with solemn eyes. "Are you an angel?" A surprised laugh escaped Kieran. "No, son, just a cowboy who was passing by." "Cowboys ride horses," Thomas said with the certainty only a child could muster. "Do you have horses?" "I do," Kieran confirmed. "Quite a few." Thomas's eyes widened. "Can I see them?" "Thomas," Hannah admonished gently. "Mr. Vance has already done enough for us." Kieran surprised her by smiling, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "When you're stronger, I'd be happy to show you the horses." Thomas beamed, and for the first time in months, Hannah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They weren't safe yet, their future remained uncertain, but for this moment, in the warmth of a stranger's home, she allowed herself to hope. Over the next few days, Hannah's strength gradually returned. Dr. Martin, the town physician, arrived as promised once the roads cleared. He was a gruff man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, but his examination was thorough and gentle. "No signs of consumption," he declared after listening to both Hannah's and Thomas's lungs. "Just a bad case of influenza, complicated by exposure and malnutrition." He fixed Hannah with a stern look. "You need to eat more, Mrs. Summers. Can't take care of that boy if you don't take care of yourself." Hannah nodded, embarrassed by the implicit criticism but unable to explain the financial straits that had led to their malnutrition. Kieran, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, seemed to understand without being told. "I'll make sure they're both well fed, Doctor," he said. Dr. Martin packed his bag. "See that you do. I'll check back in a week." He paused at the door, glancing between Hannah and Kieran with undisguised curiosity. "Town's already talking, Vance, just so you know." Kieran's expression hardened. "Let them talk." After the doctor left, Hannah's face burned with mortification. "I'm so sorry. I didn't think about how this might appear to others." Kieran waved away her concern. "Small towns run on gossip. It's of no consequence." But Hannah knew better. A widow alone with her son in a bachelor's home, regardless of the circumstances, would be fodder for endless speculation. Her reputation, already precarious after William's slow death had drained their resources and social standing, would be irreparably damaged. "We should return to our cabin as soon as possible," she said firmly. Kieran's brow furrowed. "That's not advisable. Your cabin needs repairs before it's habitable again." At her questioning look, he explained, "I rode over yesterday to check. The roof's partially collapsed from the snow. It'll take time to fix." Hannah felt the room spin. The cabin had been their last asset, the only thing standing between them and complete destitution. I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas, who had been playing with some wooden animals Kieran had carved for him, looked up at the distress in his mother's voice. "Are we going home, Mama?" Hannah swallowed hard. "Not just yet, darling." Kieran knelt beside Thomas. "Your mama needs to rest a bit longer. Would you like to help me feed the chickens while she rests?" Thomas nodded eagerly, previous conversation forgotten in the excitement of a new adventure. After they left, Hannah sank onto the bed, tears she'd been holding back for months finally spilling over. What options remained for a widow with a young son and no resources? She could seek domestic employment in town, but most households wouldn't welcome a child. The orphanage in Helena was always an option, but the thought of surrendering Thomas to such a place made her physically ill. She could write to her parents in Philadelphia, but they had opposed her marriage and move west so vehemently that bridges had been thoroughly burned. By the time Kieran and Thomas returned, rosy-cheeked and laughing, Hannah had composed herself. She watched as her son excitedly recounted his chicken-feeding adventure, noticing how Kieran listened with genuine interest, asking questions and encouraging the boy's enthusiasm. "And Mr. Vance says tomorrow I can help with the horses if you say it's okay," Thomas concluded, looking at Hannah with pleading eyes. Hannah glanced at Kieran, who shrugged. "Only if you're feeling up to it," he said. "No rush." That evening, after Thomas had fallen asleep, Hannah found Kieran at the kitchen table, poring over a ledger by lamplight. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly conscious of her borrowed nightgown and loose hair. Kieran looked up, closing the book. "Something you need, Mrs. Summers." "Hannah," she corrected. "Please call me Hannah, and I wanted to discuss our situation." Kieran gestured to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." Hannah sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I appreciate everything you've done for us, Mr. Vance." "Kieran," he interrupted. "Kieran," she acknowledged with a small smile. "But I need to be practical about our future. You mentioned my cabin needs repairs. How extensive are they?" Kieran's expression turned serious. The north wall and about half the roof will need to be rebuilt. The snow collapse damaged some of your furniture as well. Hannah absorbed this, mentally calculating costs she knew she couldn't afford. I see. I can help with the repairs, Kieran offered, once the weather improves. That's very generous, but I couldn't possibly accept more charity, Hannah replied. We've imposed enough. It's not charity, Kieran said, his tone sharper than she'd heard before. It's being a decent human being. Hannah stiffened. I didn't mean to offend you. Kieran ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly tired. You didn't. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I know what it's like to need help and be too proud to ask for it. Something in his voice, a vulnerability she hadn't heard before, made Hannah study him more closely. For all his capability and strength, she realized there was a wound there, something unhealed. I'm not too proud, she said softly, just too aware of what I can never repay. Kieran met her gaze. Not everything needs repayment. Hannah couldn't hold his intense blue eyes for long. She looked down at her hands, noticing how work-worn they'd become in just 3 years on the frontier. She'd once played the piano beautifully, her fingers dancing across keys in her parents' elegant Philadelphia home. Now they were cracked and calloused, the nails broken short. I need to find work, she said, returning to practical matters. Once I'm fully recovered, Kieran nodded. Town's growing, might be opportunities. Would you? Hannah hesitated, hating to ask for more favors. Would you be willing to take me into town when I'm stronger? I should speak with people, see what's available. Of course, Kieran agreed. Though there's no rush. You and Thomas are welcome here while you recover and make arrangements. Hannah wanted to protest further, to insist they'd imposed enough, but exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her. The simple conversation had drained what little energy she'd recovered. Kieran seemed to notice. You should rest, he said, standing. We can discuss this more tomorrow. Hannah nodded, rising on unsteady feet. To her embarrassment, the room tilted slightly, and she had to grasp the table for support. In an instant, Kieran was beside her, his arm around her waist, steadying her. Easy now. The sudden proximity sent an unexpected warmth through Hannah. She hadn't been this close to a man since William's death, hadn't felt the solid strength of masculine support. It was both comforting and disconcerting. Thank you, she murmured, regaining her balance but still aware of his hand at her waist. I'm fine now. Kieran released her but remained close. I'll walk you to your room. The gesture was unnecessary but kind. Hannah allowed him to escort her down the short hallway to the bedroom she shared with Thomas. At the doorway, she paused. Good night, Kieran, and thank you for everything. Kieran simply nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Sleep well, Hannah. As she slipped into the room, Hannah was struck by how naturally their names had fallen from each other's lips. Such familiarity would have been scandalous in Philadelphia society. But here, in this remote wilderness, old conventions seemed distant and irrelevant. She settled beside Thomas, listening to his steady breathing, and wondered what the coming days would bring. Morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, the first Hannah had seen in weeks. The light streamed through the small window, creating patterns on the wooden floor. Thomas was already awake, sitting cross-legged on his trundle bed and examining one of the carved animals Kieran had given him. Mama, can we see the horses today? He asked the moment he noticed she was awake. Mr. Vance said I could help brush them. Hannah smiled at his enthusiasm. If you're feeling strong enough and if Mr. Vance isn't too busy. I'm strong, Thomas declared, flexing his small arm to demonstrate. And Mr. Vance said taking care of animals is never too busy because they depend on us. Hannah's heart warmed at the simple wisdom Kieran had shared with her son. William had been a loving father, but often too exhausted from working their land to engage Thomas in such conversations. The boy clearly craved male attention and guidance. After dressing in clothes Kieran had salvaged from their cabin, somehow managing to find items relatively undamaged by the collapse, Hannah followed Thomas's excited chatter to the kitchen. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon greeted them. Kieran stood at the stove, his back to them, humming a tune Hannah didn't recognize. The domesticity of the scene struck her forcefully. This man, this stranger who had saved their lives, was cooking breakfast as if their presence in his home was the most natural thing in the world. Thomas announced their arrival by rushing forward. "Mr. Vance, Mama says I can see the horses if you're not too busy." Kieran turned, spatula in hand, and grinned. "Well, good morning to you too, partner. And no, I'm not too busy. Horses need tending every day." He glanced up at Hannah, his smile softening. "Morning. Coffee's fresh if you want some." Hannah nodded gratefully, moving to the stove. As she reached for the pot, her hand briefly brushed against Kieran's. The contact was fleeting but sent a jolt through her that she hadn't experienced in years. She withdrew quickly, busying herself with pouring the coffee to hide her confusion. Breakfast was a lively affair, with Thomas peppering Kieran with questions about ranch life. Hannah observed their interaction, noting how Kieran never talked down to the boy or dismissed his curiosity. Instead, he answered each question thoughtfully, occasionally redirecting Thomas's attention to his cooling food. "Eat up," he reminded Thomas. "Can't be a proper ranch hand on an empty stomach." After breakfast, they bundled up against the cold, which remained fierce despite the sunshine. Kieran helped Thomas with his coat, showing him how to wrap his scarf to protect his face from the wind. The ranch was larger than Hannah had realized during their arrival in the blizzard. A sturdy barn stood about 50 yards from the main house, with corrals extending beyond. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, Hannah could see cattle grazing on winter-sparse pasture. "You manage all this yourself?" she asked, impressed. Kieran nodded. "I have a hand who helps with the cattle, Miguel Rivera. Good man. He lives in that cabin over there." He pointed to a small structure near the pastures. "He's in town for supplies today." The barn was blessedly warm after the frigid walk, the air heavy with the smell of hay and horses. 6 stalls lined one wall, 4 of them occupied by magnificent animals who nickered softly at their entrance. Thomas's eyes widened to saucers. "They're so big," Kieran chuckled, leading them to the first stall. "This is Dancer," he said, indicating a dappled gray mare who immediately pushed her nose forward for attention. "She's the gentlest of the bunch, perfect for a first-time horseman." He lifted Thomas up to see better, holding the boy securely as he reached out a tentative hand to stroke Dancer's nose. The mare snuffled curiously at Thomas's palm, making him giggle. "She tickles," Thomas exclaimed. "She's saying hello," Kieran explained. "Horses use their noses like we use our hands." Hannah watched as Kieran patiently taught Thomas how to approach the horses, how to speak softly around them, and eventually how to help brush Dancer's gleaming coat. The man's gentleness with both her son and the animals revealed a tenderness that seemed at odds with his rugged exterior. "You're good with him," Hannah observed quietly as Thomas carefully brushed Dancer's mane under Kieran's supervision. Kieran glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "He's a good kid, smart." "He is," Hannah agreed, pride evident in her voice. "William, my husband, always said Thomas had a natural curiosity that would serve him well." Kieran nodded. "Your husband was right." After a pause, he added, "If you don't mind me asking, what brought your family out west?" Hannah sighed, leaning against a support beam. "The usual reasons: opportunity, land. William was a schoolteacher in Philadelphia, but he dreamed of building something of his own. She smiled sadly. He had such plans for our homestead, a proper farm, maybe even orchards eventually. Philadelphia is a long way from Montana territory, Kieran remarked. Yes, Hannah agreed. My parents were horrified when I chose to follow William out here. They thought I was throwing away my prospects, their word, not mine. Kieran raised an eyebrow. Sounds like there's a story there. Hannah shrugged. Nothing unique. Wealthy family, expectations for their daughter to make an advantageous match. William was brilliant but from a modest background. When we eloped, my father said I'd made my choice and would have to live with the consequences. Harsh, Kieran commented. Perhaps, Hannah conceded, but William and I were happy even with the hardships, at least until he fell ill. She swallowed hard. Consumption works quickly sometimes, but for William it was slow, almost a year from diagnosis to the end. Kieran's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry. Hannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. Instead, she watched Thomas, who was now solemnly offering a carrot to Dancer under Kieran's guidance. What about you? She asked, changing the subject. What brought you to this remote stretch of Montana? A shadow crossed Kieran's face. Needed space, I suppose. After the war, cities felt confining. You fought in the war between the states? Hannah asked, surprised. Kieran didn't seem old enough to have served, though the silver in his hair might have misled her estimate of his age. Enlisted at 17, he confirmed. Saw things no boy should see, came back a different person. The simple statement held volumes of unspoken pain. Hannah had known many veterans in Philadelphia, had seen the haunted look in their eyes that sometimes appeared in Kieran's. And your family? She probed gently. Kieran's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. None to speak of. Parents died when I was young, raised by an uncle who wasn't particularly interested in the job. He straightened, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Thomas is doing well with Dancer. Want to try brushing her yourself? Hannah recognized the deflection but didn't press. Everyone had wounds they preferred to keep private. Instead, she accepted the brush he offered, moving to stand beside her son. For the next hour, Hannah lost herself in the simple pleasure of caring for the animals. Kieran showed her how to brush in the direction of the coat, how to speak soothingly to nervous animals, how to check hooves for stones or injuries. His hands occasionally covered hers to demonstrate proper technique, and each time, that same unexpected warmth spread through her. It had been so long since she'd felt anything but grief and worry that the sensation was almost foreign, a reminder that beneath the struggling widow and mother, a young woman of just 24 still existed. By the time they finished with the horses, Thomas was flagging despite his protests to the contrary. The morning's activities had taxed his recovering strength. I think it's time for a rest, Hannah said firmly, as Thomas unsuccessfully tried to stifle a yawn. But I'm not tired, Thomas insisted, even as he rubbed his eyes. Kieran knelt to Thomas's level. Every good ranch hand knows the importance of rest, he said seriously. Can't do your best work if you're worn out. Tell you what, you rest now, and later I'll show you how to make biscuits for supper. Thomas's expression brightened at this compromise. Promise, promise, Kieran confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. As they walked back to the house, Thomas between them, Hannah found herself studying Kieran's profile against the winter sky. Who was this man really? A war-haunted cowboy with a gentle touch and kind eyes, living alone in the wilderness. A man who'd risk a blizzard to check on distant neighbors, who'd welcome strangers into his home without hesitation. The more she learned about Kieran Vance, the more intrigued she became and the more dangerous that intrigue felt. Hannah had already built and lost one life in this harsh territory. She couldn't afford to dream of another. Yet as Thomas's small hand slipped trustingly into Kieran's, Hannah couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to belong here with him, in this place he'd carved from the wilderness. The thought both terrified and tempted her. True to his word, Kieran showed Thomas how to make biscuits that evening. Hannah watched from the kitchen table, mending one of Thomas's shirts that had torn during their hasty evacuation from the cabin. "The secret," Kieran was saying as he demonstrated how to cut cold butter into flour, "is not to handle the dough too much. Makes the biscuits tough if you do." Thomas nodded solemnly, his face comically serious as he concentrated on the task. A streak of flour adorned his cheek, and more dusted his borrowed shirt. "My ma taught me this recipe," Kieran continued, his voice taking on a nostalgic quality Hannah hadn't heard before. "She could make biscuits light as clouds, even with the poorest ingredients." "Where did you grow up?" Hannah asked, curious about this rare glimpse into his past. "Kentucky originally," Kieran replied, helping Thomas cut the dough into circles. "Moved around a bit after my parents passed. St. Louis for a while, then Denver." "Is that where you enlisted?" Kieran nodded. "Union Army, 1861. Spent most of the war in Tennessee and Georgia." Hannah thought of the battles she'd read about in those regions, bloody, brutal affairs that had claimed thousands of lives. No wonder he carried shadows in his eyes. "After the war," she prompted. Kieran shrugged. "Drifted. Worked cattle drives in Texas, did some mining in Colorado. Nothing seemed to fit until I found this place 2 years ago." "And you've been here alone all that time?" The question slipped out before Hannah could consider its implications. Kieran glanced up, his eyes meeting hers. "Not entirely. Had a partner at first, James Elliott. Good man, excellent with horses. We were building something solid." He paused, his hands stilling on the dough. "Fever took him last spring, happened fast." "I'm sorry," Hannah said softly, understanding now why he'd shown no fear of potential illness when rescuing them. He'd already faced that particular demon. Kieran nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Thomas with forced cheerfulness. "Ready to put these in the oven, partner." As they finished preparing supper together, Hannah was struck by how naturally they moved around each other, like a family that had shared the same space for years rather than days. Thomas chattered happily, more animated than he'd been since William's death, while Kieran responded with patience and genuine interest. Hannah found herself joining their conversation, laughing at Thomas's observations and adding her own stories. For the first time in months, the weight of grief and worry lifted slightly from her shoulders. This unexpected respite, this warm, safe place with a kind man felt like a gift she hadn't known to ask for. After supper, as the evening shadows lengthened, Kieran surprised them by producing a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe from a small bookshelf in the corner. "Thought Thomas might enjoy a story before bed," he explained, almost shyly. "If that's all right with you." Hannah nodded, touched by the gesture. He loves stories. They settled by the fire, Thomas nestled between them on the small sofa as Kieran began to read. His deep voice brought the adventure to life, and Hannah found herself as captivated as her son by the tale of survival and ingenuity. When Thomas's eyes finally grew heavy, Hannah carried him to bed, tucking him in with a kiss to his forehead. "Sweet dreams, my brave boy." She returned to find Kieran still by the fire, staring into the flames with a pensive expression. "Thank you," Hannah said quietly, retaking her seat. "For the story, for all of this." Kieran looked up, the firelight casting shadows across his features. "No need for thanks." "There is," Hannah insisted. "You've done more than simply rescue us, Kieran. You've given Thomas something I feared he'd lost forever, a sense of safety and joy." Kieran's expression softened. He's a remarkable child. Yes, Hannah agreed, her voice wavering slightly. But he's also a child who's lost his father, his home, and nearly lost his mother as well. The way you've welcomed him, taught him, made him feel secure, she broke off, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Hannah, Kieran said gently, leaning forward, any decent man would do the same. No, Hannah replied firmly. They wouldn't. The world isn't as full of decent men as you seem to think. A moment of silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire. We should go into town tomorrow, Kieran finally said, changing the subject. If you're feeling strong enough. You mentioned wanting to look for work, and I need to order lumber for your cabin repairs. Hannah nodded, though the reminder of their temporary situation sent a pang through her heart. Yes, I should speak with people, see what opportunities might exist. The town's growing, Kieran offered. Silverton's not much more than a mining settlement, but they've built a proper school now. They might need a teacher. Hannah hadn't considered teaching. She had a good education, one of the few advantages her privileged upbringing had provided, but no formal training as an educator. Do you think they'd consider a woman without teaching credentials? Kieran shrugged. Frontier towns can't afford to be too particular. Your education would put you ahead of most candidates. The possibility kindled a spark of hope. Teaching would provide a steady income and, most importantly, would allow her to keep Thomas with her. I'll inquire tomorrow, she decided. As the fire burned low, neither seemed inclined to end the evening. There was comfort in the shared silence, in the simple act of existing together in the warm room while winter raged outside. Finally, Hannah rose reluctantly. I should rest if we're traveling tomorrow. Kieran stood as well, suddenly close enough that Hannah could see the fine lines around his eyes, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him. Good night, Hannah, he said softly. Good night, she replied, oddly breathless. She turned quickly, retreating to the bedroom before she could examine the flutter in her stomach too closely. As she lay beside Thomas in the darkness, listening to his even breathing, Hannah acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was attracted to Kieran Vance, drawn not just to his kindness and strength, but to him as a man. The realization brought equal measures of guilt and excitement. William had been dead just over 2 months. Was it disloyal to feel such things so soon? Or was it simply the natural response of a young widow, suddenly aware that her life might continue after all? Hannah closed her eyes, pushing away the complicated emotions. Tomorrow would bring practical matters: the search for work, plans for rebuilding, a path forward for herself and Thomas. That was what mattered now, not the confusing warmth she felt in Kieran's presence. Yet as sleep claimed her, it was Kieran's blue eyes and gentle voice that followed her into dreams. The journey to Silverton the next morning revealed a landscape transformed. The blizzard had left behind a world of crystalline white, stretching unbroken to the distant mountains. The sun cast a golden glow across the snow, creating a beauty so stark it almost hurt to look at it. Hannah sat beside Kieran in his sleigh, Thomas between them, bundled in layers of blankets. The jingling of the harness bells and the rhythmic crunch of runners on snow created a peaceful backdrop to their occasional conversation. It's beautiful, Hannah murmured, gazing at the pristine wilderness. I forget sometimes, when struggling with daily survival, just how magnificent this land can be. Kieran nodded. That's why I stay despite the hardships. There's a freedom here you can't find back east. William felt the same, Hannah said. He used to stand outside our cabin at sunset and say he could breathe out here in a way he never could in Philadelphia. Wise man, Kieran commented. He was, Hannah agreed, a familiar ache in her chest. but perhaps not practical enough for frontier life. He was a dreamer at heart. Thomas, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Papa told me dreams are important. He said dreams make the hard work worth doing." Hannah hugged her son closer. "He was right about that, darling." Kieran glanced at Thomas. "Your papa sounds like a good man who knew what mattered." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Mama says he's in heaven now, watching over us." "I believe he is," Kieran replied with equal seriousness. The simple exchange brought tears to Hannah's eyes that she quickly blinked away. Kieran's respectful acknowledgement of William, his easy inclusion of William's memory in their conversation, touched her deeply. Many men might have avoided the topic altogether. The town of Silverton appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with smaller structures scattered up the hillside behind. Despite its modest size, the town bustled with activity. Miners, cowboys, and townspeople moved purposefully between buildings, while wagons and horses crowded the muddy street. Kieran guided the sleigh to a hitching post outside the general store. "I need to order supplies," he explained as he helped Hannah and Thomas down. "The schoolhouse is at the end of the street if you want to inquire about teaching positions." Hannah nodded, adjusting her bonnet. She'd taken extra care with her appearance that morning, wearing her best and only dress that had survived the cabin collapse. The dark blue wool was somewhat faded but still presentable. "Thomas can stay with me if you like," Kieran offered. "Jefferson at the store has a boy about his age. They could play while we conduct our business." Hannah hesitated, reluctant to be separated from Thomas but recognizing the practicality of the suggestion. A 5-year-old would quickly grow restless during employment inquiries. "Would that be all right with you, Thomas?" she asked. Thomas looked between his mother and Kieran, considering. "Can I come find you after, of course," Hannah assured him. "I won't be far." With that settled, Hannah made her way down the street, acutely aware of curious glances from townspeople. News traveled fast in small communities, and she suspected many already knew of her rescue by Kieran Vance. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with a bell tower. As Hannah approached, the door opened, and a harried-looking woman emerged, locking the door behind her. "Excuse me," Hannah called. "Are you the school teacher?" The woman turned, revealing a pleasant face framed by graying hair. "I was," she replied with a tired smile. "Leaving on tomorrow's stage, though. My sister in Denver is ill and needs my care." Hannah couldn't believe her luck. "Then the position is open. I was hoping to inquire about teaching opportunities." The woman's expression brightened. "Providence indeed." "Are you qualified, Miss?" "Mrs. Summers." "Hannah Summers," she clarified. "And I have a solid education: literature, mathematics, history. I've never taught formally, but I've been educating my son at home." The woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Abigail Porter studied Hannah thoughtfully. "Formal credentials are scarce out here," she acknowledged. "More important is character and dedication." She gestured for Hannah to walk with her. "The school board meets this evening at the mayor's office. I'd be happy to introduce you. We have 23 students currently, ages 5 to 16. Pay is modest but includes living quarters above the schoolroom." Hannah's heart leaped at this news. Housing had been her greatest concern. "That would be perfect," she said earnestly. "My son and I need a fresh start, Mrs." Porter's expression softened with understanding. "I heard about your situation. Very sorry about your husband and your cabin. Mr. Vance is a good man to have helped you." Hannah nodded, unsure how to respond to this confirmation that her circumstances were common knowledge. "Don't worry about the gossips," Mrs. Porter advised, seeming to read her thoughts. "Frontier towns need practical thinking, not rigid propriety. Most folks here have faced desperate situations themselves at some point." They arranged to meet at the mayor's office at 7 that evening, and Hannah continued down the street with a lighter heart. If all went well with the school board, she and Thomas could have a new home and livelihood within days. Her next stop was the Mercantile, where she found Thomas happily playing marbles with a freckle-faced boy while Kieran discussed lumber with the shopkeeper. Kieran looked up as she approached, a question in his eyes. Hannah smiled, nodding slightly to indicate her good news. The relief and genuine pleasure that crossed his face warmed her. "Mrs. Porter is leaving tomorrow," she explained. "The teaching position is available with quarters above the school. I'm meeting with the school board tonight." "That's excellent news," Kieran said. "I told you your education would be valued here." The shopkeeper, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, joined their conversation. "You'll be a welcome addition to Silverton, Mrs. Summers. We've worried about losing Mrs. Porter with no replacement in sight." "Thank you, Mr." Hannah trailed off questioningly. "Jefferson. Louis Jefferson," the man supplied, extending a hand. "My boy Daniel there is school age and bright as a new penny when he applies himself." Hannah shook his hand, warmed by the friendly reception. "I look forward to teaching him, assuming the board approves my application." "They will," Mr. Jefferson assured her. "Mrs. Porter's word carries weight, and frankly, qualified candidates aren't exactly lining up at our door." They spent another hour in town, with Kieran introducing Hannah to various merchants and townspeople they encountered. Everyone was cordial, if openly curious about the widow who'd been rescued by the reclusive rancher. By the time they returned to the ranch in the afternoon, Hannah's spirits were higher than they'd been in months. The prospect of independence, of building a new life for herself and Thomas, seemed suddenly within reach. "Will you miss us when we move to town?" Thomas asked Kieran as they ate a simple lunch of bread and stew. The question, innocently direct in the way only children can manage, created an immediate tension. Hannah saw Kieran's hand still momentarily before he carefully set down his spoon. "I will," he admitted, meeting Thomas's gaze. "But Silverton isn't far. You can visit the horses sometimes if your mama approves." Thomas looked to Hannah hopefully. "Can we, Mama?" Hannah hesitated, aware of the complicated territory they were entering. "We'll see, darling. Mr. Vance is busy with his ranch. We wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Kieran said quietly. "You're both welcome here anytime." The simple statement, laden with unspoken meaning, hung in the air between them. Hannah busied herself with her meal, avoiding Kieran's gaze. Later that afternoon, as Hannah prepared for her meeting with the school board, Kieran knocked softly on the bedroom door. "Come in," she called, pinning the last strand of her chestnut hair into a neat bun. Kieran entered, holding something wrapped in cloth. "I have something for you," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant. "For your meeting tonight." Hannah turned from the small mirror, curious. Kieran unwrapped the bundle to reveal a beautiful tortoiseshell comb inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained, offering it to her. "Thought it might, I don't know, add something special for your interview." Hannah stared at the exquisite piece, touched beyond words by the gesture. "Kieran, I couldn't possibly, please," he interrupted. "It's just gathering dust here." "My mother would have liked knowing it was being used by someone who appreciated it." Slowly, Hannah accepted the comb. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's beautiful." Kieran nodded, appearing relieved by her acceptance. "I'll hitch up the sleigh whenever you're ready." "Thomas is welcome to stay here with me if that's easier for you." Hannah considered the offer. The meeting might run late, and Thomas would likely be tired after the day's excitement. "If you're certain it's no trouble," she began. "None at all," Kieran assured her. "We have more of Robinson Crusoe to read." And Miguel returned from town with some peppermint sticks that Thomas might enjoy. The casual mention of treats and stories, the normal, comforting rituals of childhood that Hannah had struggled to maintain, since William's death caused a lump to form in her throat. "Thank you," she said again, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Kieran merely nodded before leaving her to finish preparing. Hannah carefully removed the plain wooden comb from her hair and replaced it with Kieran's mother's piece. The elegant accessory transformed her simple appearance, lending a touch of refinement that reminded Hannah of the society woman she'd once been. For a moment, she studied her reflection, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. 3 years of frontier living had weathered her once pampered skin, had added shadows beneath her eyes and a firmness to her jaw that spoke of hardship endured. Yet she looked stronger somehow, more substantial than the sheltered girl who'd left Philadelphia. The meeting with the school board proved less intimidating than Hannah had anticipated. 6 members: the mayor, the town doctor, the minister, and 3 prominent citizens listened attentively as Mrs. Porter introduced Hannah and outlined her qualifications. Their questions were direct but fair, focusing primarily on Hannah's educational background and her commitment to remaining in Silverton. "My son and I need stability," Hannah explained honestly. "I'm seeking not just employment but a community where we can build a future." This answer seemed to satisfy them. After a brief private discussion, Mayor Holloway offered Hannah the position, with duties to commence the following Monday. "The salary is $35 per month," he informed her. Quarters above the school are simple but clean 2 rooms with a small kitchen area. Wood for heating is provided, as are basic furnishings. Hannah accepted gratefully, relief washing over her. The salary was modest but sufficient for their needs, especially with housing included. As she left the meeting, the enormity of what had just occurred struck her. In the span of a week, she had nearly died, been rescued by a stranger, and now secured a position that promised independence and security. The swift turn of fortune left her dizzy with gratitude and hope. Kieran waited outside with the sleigh, his tall figure easily distinguishable in the lamplight from the mayor's office. "They offered me the position," Hannah announced as she approached, unable to contain her smile. Kieran's face broke into a matching grin. "I knew they would. Congratulations." As they drove back to the ranch through the clear, cold night, Hannah described the meeting and the arrangements for her new position. "They'd like me to start Monday," she concluded. "So we'll need to move to town by Sunday." Kieran nodded, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "I can take you and your belongings then." "What about our cabin?" Hannah asked. "Should I try to salvage anything else from it?" "I'll see to the repairs," Kieran said. "Might take a few weeks with the weather, but it can be done." "Then you'll have options: live in town during the school year, perhaps use the cabin in summer." The thoughtfulness of his planning, the way he continued to think of her future welfare, touched Hannah deeply. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. "You've gone far beyond what anyone would expect from a good Samaritan." Kieran was silent for a long moment, the only sounds the jingling of the harness and the runners on snow. "During the war," he finally said, his voice low, "I saw the worst of humanity. Men killing each other over ideas, leaving widows and orphans in their wake." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When I found you and Thomas that night, something shifted, like maybe I could balance some small part of all that suffering by helping you both." Hannah absorbed his words, understanding the weight behind them. "You've done far more than balance scales, Kieran. You've given us a future." They rode in companionable silence the rest of the way, each lost in their own thoughts. Thomas was asleep when they arrived, tucked into his trundle bed with one of the carved animals clutched in his small hand. Hannah watched him for a moment, her heart full. Tomorrow she would tell him about their new home, their new beginning. In the kitchen, Kieran poured them each a small measure of whiskey. "To celebrate your new position," he explained, offering Hannah a glass. She accepted it with a smile, though she rarely drank spirits. "To new beginnings," she proposed, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," Kieran echoed, his eyes holding hers as they both sipped. The whiskey burned pleasantly down Hannah's throat, warming her from within. Or perhaps it wasn't the whiskey at all, but the way Kieran looked at her as if she were something precious, something worth protecting. "I should return your mother's comb," Hannah said, reaching up to remove it. "Keep it," Kieran said quickly. "Please, consider it a gift for your new position." Hannah hesitated. "It's a family heirloom." "Surely you'd want to save it for," she stopped, uncertain how to finish the thought without presumption. "For," Kieran prompted. "Your future," Hannah said carefully. "Perhaps a wife someday or a daughter." A shadow crossed Kieran's face. "I've lived alone a long time, Hannah. Made my peace with it." "That seems a lonely future to accept," Hannah ventured. "Especially for someone with so much to offer." Kieran's gaze intensified. "What do you see that I have to offer?" The directness of the question caught Hannah off guard. She should deflect, change the subject, maintain the careful distance propriety demanded. Instead, she found herself answering with equal honesty. Strength, but also gentleness. Intelligence, integrity. She paused, gathering courage. The capacity to care deeply, even for strangers. Kieran set down his glass, moving closer. "Not strangers anymore," he said softly. "No," Hannah agreed, her heart racing. "Not strangers." For a charged moment they stood inches apart, the air between them heavy with unspoken possibility. Hannah could see the pulse beating in Kieran's throat, could smell the clean scent of soap and pine that seemed to cling to him. Then, as if remembering himself, Kieran stepped back. "It's late," he said, his voice rough. "You should rest. Tomorrow we'll be busy with preparations for your move." Hannah nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the return to practicality. "Good night, Kieran." "Good night, Hannah." As she slipped into the bedroom, Hannah pressed a hand to her flushed cheek. What was happening between them? And more importantly, what did she want to happen? The questions followed her into restless dreams. Sunday arrived with a mixture of excitement and melancholy. Hannah and Thomas packed their few belongings, clothes rescued from their cabin, the wooden animals Kieran had carved, and several books he'd insisted they take with them. Hannah wore the tortoiseshell comb in her hair, touching it occasionally as if to reassure herself of its presence. Kieran loaded their trunks into the sleigh, his movements efficient but lacking his usual easy energy. The impending separation weighed heavily on them all, though no one spoke of it directly. Thomas, sensing the tension, grew unusually quiet. As Kieran secured the last of their belongings, the boy tugged at his sleeve. "Will you visit us in town?" Thomas asked, his small face solemn. Kieran knelt to Thomas's level. "Of course I will, and you can visit the horses whenever your mama says it's all right." Thomas nodded, apparently satisfied with this arrangement. "I'm going to be a cowboy like you when I grow up," he announced. A smile cracked through Kieran's serious expression. "Is that so?" "Yes," Thomas confirmed. "Mama says I can be anything if I work hard and study my lessons." "Your mama's right about that," Kieran agreed, ruffling Thomas's hair. "And you'll make a fine cowboy someday." Hannah watched the exchange from the porch, her heart aching with emotions she couldn't fully name. In just a week, Kieran Vance had become important to them, both a steady presence they'd come to rely on, to trust. The journey to Silverton passed too quickly. Hannah found herself memorizing details, the way Kieran's hands held the reins, how his profile looked against the winter sky, the deep timbre of his voice as he pointed out landmarks to Thomas. Small things that suddenly seemed precious. The school and attached living quarters stood at the edge of town, a simple two-story wooden structure painted white. Mrs. Porter waited on the porch to welcome them and hand over the keys. "Everything's ready for you," she assured Hannah as they climbed the narrow stairs to the living quarters. "I've left some provisions to get you started: flour, coffee, sugar, and such." The accommodations were indeed simple but clean and welcoming. A main room with a small kitchen area and wood stove connected to a bedroom just large enough for a full-sized bed and a child's trundle. Windows on both sides provided ample light and views of the town and distant mountains. "It's perfect," Hannah said sincerely. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Porter." The older woman squeezed Hannah's hand. "You'll do well here. The children need stability and care as much as education." After Mrs. Porter left to finish her own packing for tomorrow's departure, Kieran brought up their trunks. Hannah busied herself arranging their few possessions while Thomas explored every corner of their new home. "Look, Mama, I can see the whole street from here," he called from the window. "Don't lean out too far," Hannah cautioned automatically. Kieran set down the last trunk, his task complete. An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with words unsaid. "Thank you," Hannah finally offered, "for everything. I don't know how we can ever repay you." Kieran shook his head. "There's nothing to repay." Another silence stretched, neither willing to say goodbye. "I should go," Kieran finally said, though he made no move toward the door. "Let you get settled." Hannah nodded, fighting an unexpected urge to ask him to stay. "Of course." Thomas hurried over, sensing the impending departure. "You're leaving now?" Kieran knelt again, meeting the boy's gaze. "Just for now, but I'll come check on you both soon." "Promise," Thomas pressed. "Promise," Kieran confirmed solemnly. Thomas surprised them both by throwing his arms around Kieran's neck in a fierce hug. Kieran's expression softened as he returned the embrace, something vulnerable flashing across his face. When Thomas released him, Kieran stood, turning to Hannah. "If you need anything at all, send word to the ranch. Miguel or I will come right away." "Thank you," Hannah said again, the words inadequate for what she felt. On impulse, she stepped forward and brushed a kiss against his cheek. "For saving us." Kieran's eyes widened slightly at the contact. His hand came up, almost touching his cheek where her lips had been, before dropping back to his side. "Take care of each other," he said quietly before turning to leave. Hannah and Thomas watched from the window as Kieran's sleigh disappeared down the street, a hollowness settling in Hannah's chest that had nothing to do with hunger or fatigue. "I miss him already," Thomas said simply. Hannah brushed a hand over her son's hair. "So do I," she admitted. "But we'll see him again soon." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Hannah quickly settled into her role as Silverton's schoolteacher, finding unexpected fulfillment in the work. The children were eager to learn, if somewhat unruly at first, and the parents supportive of her methods. Thomas thrived in the classroom environment, proud to help his mother with small tasks and making friends with children his age. Their quarters, though modest, became a true home with the addition of small touches: wildflowers in a jar, a patchwork quilt purchased from the mercantile, drawings Thomas created pinned to the walls. True to his word, Kieran visited regularly. He always brought small gifts: a sack of apples, a book of poetry, a wooden toy he'd carved for Thomas. Each visit left Hannah both contented and unsettled, happy for his company, yet increasingly aware of the growing attachment she felt toward him. Spring came slowly to the mountains, melting the snow in fits and starts. With the improved weather, Kieran began repairs on Hannah's cabin, riding out each weekend with lumber and tools. "It's coming along well," he reported one Sunday afternoon as he sat at Hannah's small table, enjoying the coffee and pie she'd prepared for his visit. Roof's nearly done. Should have the north wall rebuilt by the end of the month. Hannah nodded, watching Thomas draw at the other end of the table. The boy had taken to creating elaborate pictures of Kieran's ranch, complete with horses and cattle. "I appreciate all your work," she said, "though I'm not sure when we'll use it. The school term runs through December." Kieran shrugged. "No rush. It'll be there when you need it." The casual remark, the assumption that they had time, that this connection between them would continue indefinitely, warmed Hannah's heart. As April turned to May, the mountains exploded with wildflowers, painting the previously barren landscape in vibrant colors. Hannah took her students on nature walks, teaching botany and natural history while they collected specimens for classroom study. On one such expedition, they encountered Kieran on the trail, leading a horse laden with supplies toward Hannah's cabin. "Mr. Vance," Thomas shouted, breaking formation to run toward him. The other children watched curiously, many having heard of the quiet rancher but few having met him personally. Kieran dismounted, greeting Thomas with a warm smile before nodding respectfully to Hannah. "Mrs. Summers, taking the classroom outdoors today?" "Yes," Hannah confirmed, suddenly conscious of 23 pairs of eyes watching their interaction with intense interest. "We're studying native plants." Kieran addressed the assembled children. "Found some Indian paintbrush just over that ridge," he offered, pointing. "Whole field of it." This information caused excited murmuring among the students. Hannah seized the opportunity for a lesson. "Mr. Vance," she said formally, "would you be willing to tell the children about how different plants can be used by ranchers and settlers?" Kieran looked momentarily disconcerted by the request but agreed. For the next half hour he walked with the group, pointing out plants that could feed livestock, herbs with medicinal properties, and flowers that indicated good soil for farming. The children listened attentively, asking questions that Kieran answered with increasing confidence. Hannah observed with pleasure, noting how naturally he interacted with her students, neither talking down to them nor overwhelming them with information. "Mr. Vance is smart," 12-year-old Emma Wilson commented as they walked back to town, "and he knows so much about the land." "Yes," Hannah agreed, "he's very knowledgeable." "Jimmy says his pa says Mr. Vance saved your life," Emma continued with the directness of youth. "Is that true?" Hannah glanced at Thomas, who was walking ahead with his friends out of earshot. "Yes, Emma, Mr. Vance found us during the February blizzard when we were very ill. We might not have survived without his help." Emma considered this solemnly. "That's very romantic," she decided. "Like in books." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "It was an act of kindness, Emma. Mr. Vance would have done the same for anyone." Emma looked unconvinced but dropped the subject, to Hannah's relief. That evening, Hannah found herself thinking about Emma's comment. Was there something romantic in their situation? The brave rescuer, the grateful widow, the growing friendship between them. It did sound like something from a novel, but real life was more complicated than fiction. Hannah had responsibilities to Thomas, to her students, to the memory of her husband. And Kieran. Kieran had his own demons, his own reasons for the solitary life he'd chosen. Still, as spring deepened into summer, Hannah couldn't deny the changing nature of her feelings. Each visit from Kieran brought a flutter of anticipation, each departure a lingering sadness. They talked with increasing ease and depth about books, about the war, about their hopes and disappointments. Thomas adored him, looking forward to Kieran's visits with barely contained excitement. More than once, Hannah had caught her son pretending to be Kieran during play, mimicking his way of walking and talking. By June, Hannah's cabin was fully repaired, standing stronger than before with new timbers and a properly shingled roof. "Come see it," Kieran urged during a Sunday visit. "I think you'll be pleased with the improvements." Hannah hesitated. "Is it far to walk? We can ride," Kieran suggested. "I brought an extra horse, gentle one that Thomas can sit with you." The idea appealed to Thomas immediately. "Please, Mama, I want to see our old house." Hannah agreed, partly from curiosity and partly from a desire to spend more time in Kieran's company. They set out after lunch, Thomas seated in front of Hannah on a placid mare while Kieran rode his stallion, Thunder. The day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze and clear skies stretching endlessly overhead. As they rode, Kieran pointed out interesting sights: a hawk's nest, a fox den, tracks of deer and elk in the soft ground. Hannah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, enjoying the closeness of Thomas in her arms and Kieran's steady presence beside them. This felt right somehow, natural in a way few things had since William's death. The cabin appeared around a bend, and Hannah gasped in surprise. It was transformed, the previously weathered structure now sturdy and well-built, with a new porch along the front and shutters on the windows. "Kieran," she breathed. "It's wonderful." He smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Wait until you see inside." The interior had been equally transformed. The single room was clean and bright, with repaired floorboards and freshly chinked walls. New shelves lined one wall, and a proper iron stove had replaced the crude fireplace. "How did you manage all this?" Hannah asked, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Kieran shrugged, though she could see he was proud of the work. "Had help from Miguel for the big pieces. The rest was just time and patience." Thomas had already claimed his old sleeping nook, exclaiming over the improvements. "Look, Mama. Mr. Vance built me a real bed with a mattress." Indeed, the trundle that had once served as Thomas's bed had been replaced with a proper child's bed, complete with a cornhusk mattress and colorful quilt. "This is too much," Hannah said, turning to Kieran. "The repairs alone were generous beyond measure, but this—" "I wanted to," Kieran interrupted gently. "Wanted you both to have a proper home to return to whenever you choose." The simple statement, laden with unspoken meaning, hung between them. Hannah realized with sudden clarity that Kieran wasn't just repairing a cabin, he was offering them a future, a place in his world. "Thank you," she said, unable to express the fullness of her heart. They spent the afternoon at the cabin, with Thomas exploring the nearby stream while Hannah and Kieran sat on the new porch. The comfortable silence between them spoke of growing ease in each other's company. "I've been thinking," Kieran finally said, his voice casual though his posture had tensed slightly. "The school term ends in December." "Yes," Hannah confirmed, wondering where this was leading. "You mentioned once that you and Thomas might use the cabin during summer breaks," he continued. "But winter here is harsh for someone alone." Hannah nodded, remembering all too well the brutal Montana winter that had nearly claimed their lives. "I was wondering," Kieran paused, seeming to search for words. "That is, I thought perhaps you might consider an arrangement for the winters." Hannah's heart quickened. "What sort of arrangement?" Kieran met her gaze directly. "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them, stunning in its simplicity. Hannah stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Marriage," she repeated faintly. Kieran nodded, his expression intensely serious. "I know it's sudden and perhaps not what you expected, but I care for you, Hannah. For Thomas, too. I think we could build a good life together." Hannah struggled to find words. Of all the possibilities she'd imagined for their future, this direct proposal hadn't been among them. "Kieran, she began, unsure how to continue. "This is unexpected." A flash of vulnerability crossed his face. I understand if you need time or if the answer is no. He paused, gathering himself. I wanted you to know it's an option, that there's a place for you both if you want it. Hannah's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Part of her, a significant part, thrilled at the possibility. Kieran was a good man, kind and honorable. She'd grown to care for him deeply, and Thomas adored him. The practical advantages were undeniable: security, stability, a father figure for her son. Yet another part hesitated. Was she ready for such a step? Did she love Kieran as a wife should love a husband? And what of William's memory? I need time, she finally said. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. Kieran nodded, relief evident in his expression. Not a rejection, then. Of course. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. They rode back to town in thoughtful silence, each absorbed in their own reflections. Thomas, oblivious to the momentous conversation that had occurred, chattered happily about the stream and the frogs he'd found there. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Hannah sat by the window, staring at the stars and considering Kieran's proposal. Marriage. The word itself carried such weight, such meaning. She'd entered it once for love, young and idealistic, certain that devotion would conquer all obstacles. Now she was older, wiser, aware of life's fragility and the countless ways plans could falter. Did she love Kieran? The question haunted her. She cared for him deeply, respected him, enjoyed his company. When they were apart, she missed him. When they were together, she felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. Was that love? Or was it gratitude, dependency, the natural attachment that forms between people who have shared traumatic experiences? And what of Thomas? Her son clearly adored Kieran, looked up to him as a hero and role model. Would it be fair to deny Thomas a father figure when one was so clearly offered? Or would it be more unfair to enter a marriage without complete certainty, risking future unhappiness that would affect them all? Hannah slept poorly that night, questions circling endlessly in her mind. The next morning brought no greater clarity. She went through her teaching duties mechanically, her thoughts constantly returning to Kieran's proposal. After school, Hannah took Thomas for a walk along the creek that ran behind the town. The boy splashed happily in the shallow water while Hannah sat on a flat rock, watching him and still turning over possibilities in her mind. "Mama," Thomas called, holding up a smooth stone he'd found. "Look, it's shaped like a heart." Hannah examined the stone, which indeed resembled a rough heart. "It's beautiful, darling." Thomas studied it thoughtfully. "I want to give it to Mr. Vance. You think he'll like it?" "I'm sure he will," Hannah replied, touched by the gesture. Thomas sat beside her on the rock, suddenly serious. "Mama, when is Mr. Vance coming back?" "Sunday, I expect." "As usual." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "Good, I like when he visits." "So do I," Hannah admitted. "Billy Wilson says Mr. Vance might be my new papa someday," Thomas said casually, tossing a pebble into the creek. "Is that true?" Hannah stared at her son, shocked. Had Kieran mentioned his proposal to others in town? No, that wasn't like him. More likely, speculation had been building for some time. "Why would Billy say that?" she asked carefully. Thomas shrugged. "He says his ma says Mr. Vance looks at you like his pa looks at his ma, and that you're going to get married probably." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "Thomas, adult relationships are complicated. Do you like Mr. Vance?" Thomas persisted with a child's directness. "Yes," Hannah answered honestly. "I like him very much. And he likes us," Thomas stated confidently. "So why can't he be my new papa?" Out of the mouths of babes, Hannah thought wryly. Leave it to a 5-year-old to reduce a complex emotional situation to its simplest elements. "Would you like that?" she asked, curious about her son's perspective. "If Mr. Vance became part of our family," Thomas nodded vigorously. Then we could live on the ranch with the horses, and he could teach me to be a cowboy, and you wouldn't be sad anymore." Hannah's heart constricted at his final words. "Am I sad very often?" Thomas considered the question with surprising maturity. "Not like before when Papa died. But sometimes when you think I'm sleeping, I see you crying, and you look worried a lot." Hannah pulled her son close, amazed by his perception. "I'm sorry you've seen that, darling. Being a grown-up means having worries sometimes, but that doesn't mean I'm unhappy, especially not with you." "But you're happier when Mr. Vance visits," Thomas observed. "You smile more." Hannah couldn't deny the truth of this. Kieran's visits had become the highlights of their weeks, bringing a lightness to her spirit that was evident even to her young son. That night, Hannah found herself standing before the small mirror in their quarters, studying her reflection. The woman who looked back at her had changed since that desperate February night. Her face had filled out, the hollow-cheeked exhaustion replaced by healthy color. The comb Kieran had given her gleamed in her hair, a tangible reminder of his thoughtfulness. Could she be a wife again? Kieran's wife? The idea sent a flutter through her stomach that wasn't entirely anxiety. There was anticipation there too, and hope emotions she'd thought buried with William. Sunday arrived, bringing Kieran as expected. Hannah had prepared herself for the conversation she knew they must have, but first, she watched with a full heart as Thomas proudly presented his heart-shaped stone. "It's a gift," Thomas explained seriously, "for you to keep." Kieran accepted the stone with equal seriousness, turning it over in his palm. "This is a special find, Thomas, thank you." "Mama says it's shaped like a heart," Thomas pointed out. "That means it's lucky." Kieran glanced at Hannah, a question in his eyes. "Is that so?" Hannah nodded, smiling. "So I've heard." After lunch, Thomas went to play with his friend Daniel, giving Hannah and Kieran the privacy they needed to talk. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Hannah began as they sat in the small sitting area of her quarters. Kieran nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "And?" Hannah took a deep breath. "I'm honored by your offer, Kieran, truly, and in many ways it makes perfect sense." "But," Kieran prompted, sensing her hesitation. "But marriage should be more than a practical arrangement," Hannah said gently. "It should be based on love, on a desire to share your life completely with another person." Kieran's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You think I proposed merely for practical reasons?" "No," Hannah said quickly. "I believe you care for us." But she paused, trying to articulate her concerns. "We've known each other only a few months, under unusual circumstances. I'm not sure either of us truly knows what we want to feel." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "You're right that we haven't known each other long. And yes, the circumstances were unusual." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But Hannah, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, I love Thomas. I want to build a life with you both." The directness of his declaration, the first time he'd spoken of love, took Hannah's breath away. She searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his clear blue eyes. "I care for you deeply," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure if what I feel is love or gratitude or dependency. After nearly losing everything, it's hard to trust my own emotions." Kieran nodded slowly. "I understand." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "What if we give ourselves more time, get to know each other better without the pressure of a decision hanging over us?" Relief flooded through Hannah. "I'd like that." "I could court you properly," Kieran suggested, a hint of a smile appearing. "Bring you flowers, take you to town socials, ask permission to call on Sundays like a gentleman should." Hannah laughed softly. "I'd like that too." Kieran squeezed her hand before releasing it. "Then that's what we'll do. No rush, no pressure, just time to be sure." The summer passed in a golden haze of contentment. True to his word, Kieran courted Hannah with respectful attention. He brought wildflower bouquets, escorted her and Thomas to town gatherings, and took them on picnics in the mountains. With each meeting, Hannah found herself drawn more deeply to this quiet, thoughtful man. She learned about his childhood in Kentucky, his difficult years with an uncaring uncle after his parents' deaths, his traumatic experiences in the war that still haunted his dreams occasionally. In turn, she shared more of herself, her privileged upbringing in Philadelphia, her rebellion against her parents' expectations, her deep love for William, and the devastating loss of his death. Kieran listened with unfailing patience and understanding, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. His restraint, his willingness to move at her pace, only increased Hannah's growing certainty about her feelings. By August, when Thomas's 6th birthday approached, Hannah had made her decision. The birthday celebration was simple but joyful, a picnic at the cabin, which had become their weekend retreat during the summer months. Kieran arrived early, helping Hannah prepare while Thomas explored the nearby stream, searching for more special stones to add to his collection. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, Hannah found the courage to speak. "Kieran," she began, her hands stilling on the bread she was slicing, "I've been thinking about your proposal." Kieran paused in his task of filling canteens with fresh water. "Have you?" Hannah nodded, gathering her thoughts. "These past months have been wonderful. Getting to know you better, seeing how you are with Thomas, understanding your character more deeply." Kieran set down the canteen, giving her his full attention. And I've realized something important," Hannah continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What I feel for you isn't gratitude or dependency. It's love. I love you, Kieran." The words, once spoken, felt right, true and solid and real. Hannah watched as Kieran's expression transformed, caution giving way to hope and then to joy. "Are you saying yes?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Hannah smiled. "I'm saying yes, if you still want to marry me." Kieran closed the distance between them in 2 strides, gathering her hands in his. "I want nothing more," he said fervently. "You and Thomas, you're everything to me." The intensity in his eyes made Hannah's breath catch. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, Kieran leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, their first kiss, gentle and questioning. Hannah responded, her hands sliding up to his shoulders as the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of the life they would build together. The sound of the door opening broke them apart. Thomas stood in the doorway, mud splattered and grinning, another heart-shaped stone in his palm. "I found another one," he announced triumphantly, then stopped, looking between them with sudden curiosity. "Why are you hugging?" Hannah exchanged a glance with Kieran, who nodded encouragingly. She knelt to Thomas's level, taking his small hands in hers. "Thomas, I have something important to ask you," she said seriously. "How would you feel if Mr. Vance became part of our family, if he became your new papa?" Thomas's eyes widened. "Really? For true?" Hannah nodded. "For true. Mr. Vance has asked me to marry him, and I've said yes." "But your feelings matter very much. We want to be sure you're happy with this decision." Thomas looked at Kieran, who had knelt beside Hannah. "Would I call you Papa then?" "If you want to," Kieran replied gently, "but only when you're ready. You can keep calling me Mr. Vance as long as you like." Thomas considered this solemnly. "And we'd live on the ranch with the horses." "That's the plan," Kieran confirmed. "Your mama would still teach during the school year, but we'd all live together at the ranch, and you'd have your own room." This last detail seemed to seal the deal for Thomas. "I think that would be good," he decided, "and I think Papa would think so too." Hannah's eyes filled with tears at her son's simple wisdom. "I think you're right, darling." They shared the picnic as a family that day, making plans for their future together. The wedding would be small, held at the ranch in October after the harvest was complete, but before winter set in. As the afternoon waned, Thomas fell asleep on a blanket in the shade, exhausted from his explorations and excitement. Hannah and Kieran sat on the porch steps, watching the lengthening shadows and talking quietly. "There's something I want to show you," Kieran said, taking Hannah's hand. "Just a short walk from here." Hannah followed him along a narrow path that wound through a stand of pines. The trail opened suddenly onto a small meadow filled with wildflowers, a clear brook running through its center. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. Kieran squeezed her hand. "I found it the day after you accepted the teaching position in Silverton. I came here to think about what I wanted, what I hoped for." Hannah turned to him, touched by the admission. "And what did you hope for?" "This," Kieran said simply. "You, Thomas. A family of my own." Hannah reached up, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "We spent so many years feeling alone, even when we weren't. You in your war, me in my grief. It seems like a miracle to find each other now." Kieran caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Not a miracle. Just life finding a way forward, as it always does." They married on a crisp October day, with golden aspen leaves creating a natural cathedral around the ranch. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by the townspeople of Silverton, who had come to respect the schoolteacher and the once reclusive rancher. Thomas stood proudly between them, holding the rings on a small pillow Hannah had sewn for the occasion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, it was Thomas who cheered the loudest as Kieran kissed his bride. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light in the ranch yard. As night fell, Hannah found a moment of quiet with her new husband, slipping away to the porch while the party continued. "Happy?" Kieran asked, his arm around her waist. Hannah leaned into his embrace, content beyond words. "More than I thought possible again." Inside, Thomas had fallen asleep on Miguel's lap, worn out from the excitement. The kind ranch hand had volunteered to watch over the boy while the newlyweds spent their first night together in the cabin Kieran had prepared specially for the occasion. As they prepared to leave the celebration, Thomas stirred, blinking sleepily as Hannah kissed his forehead. "We'll be back in the morning, darling," she assured him. "Miguel will take good care of you tonight." Thomas nodded, already drifting back to sleep. "Love you, Mama," he murmured. Then, with a small smile, he added, "Love you, Papa." It was the first time he'd called Kieran Papa, and Hannah felt her husband stiffen slightly beside her, emotion evident in his face. "Love you too, son," Kieran replied, his voice husky. Later, in the privacy of the cabin, illuminated only by firelight, Kieran held Hannah close. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "After the war, I couldn't imagine deserving happiness. Too much death, too many memories." Hannah traced the scar on his shoulder, a permanent reminder of battles fought long ago. "We all carry our pasts with us," she said softly, "but we don't have to let them determine our futures." Kieran kissed her deeply, a promise in his touch. "Our future begins now." 2 years passed, bringing changes and deepening bonds. Thomas thrived under Kieran's gentle guidance, learning to ride, to care for animals, to read the land and weather as his stepfather did. Hannah continued teaching, finding fulfillment in her work while treasuring her time at the ranch with her family. The winter of 1880 brought another blizzard, nearly as fierce as the one that had first brought them together. As the storm howled around the sturdy ranch house, Hannah sat by the fire, working on a small blanket, a gift for the baby due in spring. Thomas, now 8 and filled with the confidence that comes from being securely loved, read aloud from one of Kieran's books, practicing the skills that made him the top student in his class. Kieran entered from checking the animals, stomping snow from his boots. "Everyone's secured for the night," he reported. "This storm might last a while." Hannah smiled, remembering another storm another time. "We have everything we need right here." Kieran crossed to her, placing a gentle hand on her rounded belly. "That we do," he agreed, bending to kiss her. Thomas looked up from his book, grinning at his parents' affection. In his 8-year-old wisdom, he'd long ago decided that love was the most important thing a family could have, more important than fancy houses or fine clothes, or even the horses he so adored. Later that night, as Hannah drifted toward sleep in Kieran's arms, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate night when her son had whispered, "Mama's cold," to this moment of warmth and security, they had traveled a path of healing and hope. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran murmured against her hair, sensing her wakefulness. "The night you found us," Hannah replied. "How close we came to a different ending." Kieran tightened his embrace. "I thank God every day that I rode by your cabin when I did." Hannah turned in his arms, facing him in the darkness. "Do you believe in fate, Kieran? That some things are meant to be?" "I don't know about fate," he answered thoughtfully. "But I believe that when love enters your life, you must be brave enough to recognize it and hold on to it." "That's what I found with you and Thomas, a reason to be brave again." Hannah kissed him softly. "We found each other when we needed it most. Whatever brought us together, fate, chance, divine intervention, I'm grateful for it every day." Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, snow piling against windows and doors. But inside, warmth and love created a sanctuary against the cold, a family forged from hardship and hope, bound together by the courage to begin again. And when spring arrived, bringing wildflowers to the meadows and a daughter to their home, the circle felt complete. Hannah watched as Kieran held their newborn with awe and tenderness, Thomas leaning against his side to study his new sister's tiny features. "She's perfect," Kieran whispered, wonder in his voice. Thomas nodded agreement. "Can we name her Hope? Teacher says that's what keeps people going when things are hard." Hannah and Kieran exchanged glances, both remembering separate journeys of hardship that had somehow led them to this shared moment of joy. "Hope," Hannah repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, I think that's exactly right." And so Hope, Victoria Vance, joined their family, born into love and security that had been hard-won by those who cherished her. A living testament to the truth that even the coldest nights can give way to the warmest dawns, and that hearts once broken can become whole again, stronger at the mended places, more capable of love than before. In the years that followed, when travelers passed the prosperous Vance Ranch and remarked on the happiness evident in the family who lived there, few knew the full story of how it began with a desperate woman, a dying child, and a cowboy who refused to let the cold claim them. A simple act of humanity that blossomed into love, proving once again that even in the harshest wilderness, compassion can create the most enduring home.